So in this video, I'll be taking a look at one of the more common myths surrounding the murders of the Essex boys, Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. Now, this particular story focuses on whether Tony Tucker was forced outside the Range Rover before he was shot. And this has come about due to the mud seen in the front footwell of the Range Rover, along with the mud seen on the bottom of Tucker's boot, and its likeness to the mud seen on the outside of the Range Rover. However, in this video, I believe we may have a different explanation which actually leaves us with a lot more questions than answers. Take a listen to the following. Now, to understand what happened to Tucker, Tate and Rolfe when they were killed on December the 6th, I feel we need to rewind very slightly to the day before and focus on December the 5th. You'll understand why this date is of such key importance as we move further forward. Firstly, let's take a look at the statement given by Elizabeth Fletcher, Pat Tate's then girlfriend. On Friday the 8th of the 12th, 95 at South Woodham Ferrers Police Station, I took a statement from Elizabeth Ann Fletcher, during which Elizabeth informs me that on Tuesday, so Tuesday the 5th of December 95, in the early evening, Pat received a phone call on his mobile phone. She didn't hear the conversation and it was very short. But afterwards, Pat was really happy and said to Elizabeth, "I'm alright now." She said Pat had been stressed up lately. Craig and Tony then came round to Pat's home where they had a conversation in the kitchen which she says she did not hear. They then left and Pat told Elizabeth she had to leave and that he was going away for a couple of days and that he would contact her. Okay, so just to reiterate and keep this as simple as possible, the evening before Tucker, Tate and Rolfe are killed, Pat receives a short phone call in the early evening which lifts Tate's spirits, according to Lizzie Fletcher. He's gone from stressed out, all of a sudden his telephone calls come through and he completely changes. "Oh, I'm alright now, I'm fine." Now, years after the murders, we learned of where this telephone call likely originated from. This was via a CCRC appeal document which was lodged by Jack Womes and Michael Steele. And in that document, it makes reference to a telephone call which was never used during the original trial. The call in question was a short call to Pat Tate in the early evening of December the 5th at 17:03. The location? The halfway house payphone, the same location where Tucker, Tate and Rolfe would arrive on the night of their murders. Now, the reason I believe this is the call Lizzie is referring to in her police statement is quite naturally the above, but also Tate's phone activity after the call. Take a look at the following. So 17:03, a call to Pat Tate from the halfway house. 5 minutes after Tate receives the call from the halfway house, Tate's mobile calls Tucker's mobile. 2 minutes later at 17:10, Tucker is calling back Tate. A minute later, Tate is calling back Tucker. 17:12, a minute later, Tate is calling Craig Rolfe. And at 17:20, 8 minutes later, Tony Tucker is calling Craig Rolfe. So on the balance of probability, with Lizzie Fletcher claiming that Tate received a short phone call on the early evening of December the 5th, followed by Tate's attitude improving along with Tucker and Rolfe arriving at Tate's address, you would say that this is all in relation to that specific call that Tate received at 17:03 from the halfway house. Clearly, they've had some news. Something is due to take place. Now, separate to this, and changing focus for a second to Jack Womes, his phone was picked up on the transmitter that serviced the Rettendon area at 18:07, with a call that he made to Michael Steele. So 1 hour and 3 minutes after Tate receives a mysterious phone call from the halfway house, Jack Womes is picked up on the transmitter that serviced the Rettendon area. Now, you could surmise, was this Womes taking Tucker, Tate and Rolfe out and conducting some kind of dry run for the following evening, or is it simply a mere coincidence? So again, this sort of comes back to that idea that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were lured out by their killers the evening before they were murdered. Did they get told, "We're on for tomorrow. We need to go and find this lane this evening, but someone's coming in with the drugs tomorrow. They're being flown in. We need to find this lane. Come out tonight," this, that and the other. And it was really done under the sort of ruse of seeing who would turn up. Can we get them all together? Will they turn up armed? Will they be overly suspicious about being lured to a remote location? Was it simply a dry run for what was to take place the evening after? And again, this comes back and albeit this is a little bit of a novelty video, shall we say. But could this explain the mud in the front footwell of the Range Rover and the mud found on Tony Tucker's boots? Maybe it's not so much that Tucker was, pulled out of the Range Rover at gunpoint and he's got mud on his shoes, or he went for a piss and got mud on his shoes down the lane and that's why there's mud in the vehicle and mud on Tucker's boots. There could well be another explanation here. And this again comes from the statement of Lizzie Fletcher. Take a look at the following. On Wednesday morning when Liz rang Pat at home, so again Wednesday being the day that they were killed, on Wednesday morning when Liz rang Pat at home, as per her statement, he had a go at her. He said he'd been in a field all night and he was muddy. She made a comment about who he was with, i.e. another girl, and he said no, he was with Tucker. And remember where Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were found, down the bottom of Workhouse Lane, against a locked 5-bar gate leading onto open fields, open farmland. So the evening before, according to Pat Tate, he was in a field on the 5th with Tony Tucker. So does that explain why we have that mud on the bottom of Tony's boots, the mud in the front footwell of the Range Rover? Because that mud is actually from the night before, the dry run. And it makes me wonder, did they go to Workhouse Lane the night before? Were they taken to a different lane? And this is what I find fascinating about this case. We don't know all the details. They were most definitely out on the 5th doing something. They were lured out by that telephone call from the halfway house at 17:03. Tucker, Tate and Rolfe are most likely together after 1914. That's when communication with their mobile phones and phones in general ceases. So you could well say that they're in each other's company after that stage, after 1914. And then what happened after that point remains a mystery. But what we do know, according to the statement of Lizzie Fletcher, is that she spoke to Tate on the day that they were killed, and he said the night previous, the 5th, they'd been in a field all night. I'm pissed off. We've been in a field all night, and I got muddy. So does that explain the mud in the Range Rover? Does that explain the mud on Tony Tucker's boots? Now, this isn't the only strange occurrence to take place on December the 5th. We've got this idea that potentially Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were lured out for some kind of dry run. Let's go and take a look at a lane. Let's see if they turn up armed, all that sort of stuff. There's definitely something taking place on the evening of December the 5th. But there's actually something rather bizarre that transpires a little bit earlier. Now, to set the scene here, we know that the bodies of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were discovered on December the 6th around 8 a.m. by both Peter Theobald and his friend Ken Jiggins. However, Frances Theobald, who is Peter Theobald's wife, gave a rather interesting statement to the police where she describes a rather odd occurrence that transpired at White House Farm on the morning of December the 5th. You'll understand why I believe it's the 5th as we continue onwards here. But take a listen to the following. I live with my husband Peter and son Christopher at White House Farm, Rettendon, Essex. We have 2 entrances directly off the main road. On Tuesday the 5th or Wednesday the 6th of December during the day, I can recall seeing a white car pull onto our property. I thought nothing of this, but this vehicle was followed by what I believe was a green Range Rover. I took notice of this vehicle for 2 reasons. Firstly, we had considered purchasing a vehicle of the same type, and also the occupants of the Range Rover were large white males. I'm aware that Mr. Jackson runs a business called Billericay Bailiff Services. Therefore, because of the general demeanour of the occupants of the Range Rover, I just assumed they were going to call at Mr. Jackson's outbuilding. I saw the white vehicle, of which I could give no further detail, drive in. It did not stop, but continued along to the second exit. The Range Rover followed behind, and I formed the opinion that these 2 vehicles were together. Neither vehicle stopped and drove out of the gate and back onto the road towards the Rettendon Turnpike. I remember thinking, cheeky buggers. I've tried to put a time to the incident. It was daylight and it was not snowing. I believe that it could have been whilst Alan was helping my husband, which caused me to be outside in the farm shop area. If this is the case, it would be Wednesday morning before 10:30 hours. The Range Rover I saw was an registration. There was at least 2 occupants. The passenger in the front seat had a cream-coloured sleeve. I have seen photographs in the newspaper of the victims of the shooting incident. The people in the Range Rover were of a similar description to these. The passenger in the Range Rover had light brown hair. He also had what I would call a jowly fat face, aged under 40 years. As previously mentioned, I cannot give any description of occupants or type of car described as the white vehicle. Okay, now in that statement there, Frances mentions that she's unsure whether this sighting took place on the 5th or on December the 6th. But she did say that when the sighting took place, there was no snow. It wasn't snowing outside. Now, I would say, on the balance of the old probability, that this sighting took place on the 5th for the following reasons. Now, on the 6th, during the daytime, we had some localised snow. It was causing some traffic issues, etc., etc. There was some level of snow during the daytime of December the 6th, but no snow on the 5th. So I would say, all things considered, this sighting most likely took place on the 5th. I can't say for certain, but I would say it most likely took place on the 5th. Now, what stands out to me about this sighting in general is the behaviour of those 2 vehicles. Now, in my mind, the impression I get is that these vehicles have approached from the Rettendon Turnpike. They've come down the hill, they've overshot the lane, which is very easy to do because it's positioned right on the bend, right at the bottom of the hill itself. So they've overshot the lane. The next turning on the right is White House Farm, the very first place they could turn round. The 2 vehicles have pulled into White House Farm. They're not stopping. They pull in, they do a big loop round from one exit to the next exit, back onto the main road, back towards the direction of the lane, back towards the direction of Workhouse Lane. And it would appear, as Frances states here, that these 2 vehicles are together. Neither vehicle stops. Neither vehicle stops to try and work out some directions. They're both following each other. They both pull into White House Farm. They do a big loop back to the next exit, back straight onto the main road in the direction they've just come from. Now, the question here is this Tucker, Tate and Rolfe being either guided to the lane or looking for the lane themselves? Now, being armed with this information, I then went back and looked at the phone data for the morning of December the 5th. And it would appear that from around sort of 8:26, 8:27 in the morning, Tucker, Tate and Rolfe are all communicating with each other. There's telephone calls, various telephone calls between Tucker, Tate and Rolfe up until around 9:30. And then we have a period of 90 minutes where there's phone inactivity. So again, the fact that these individuals aren't calling each other doesn't prove anything, but it could suggest, couldn't it, that the fact that they're not calling each other between, say, 9:30 and 11 o'clock is because they're with each other. They're in each other's company. Another point of interest in Frances' statement there is the fact that she describes an F registration Range Rover. Again, very similar to that driven by Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. So was this Tucker, Tate and Rolfe? Is this connected to the murders of these individuals? Was this Tucker, Tate and Rolfe themselves, or some other individuals, as I say, connected with the murders? Or is it simply an unconnected event? Let me know some of your thoughts down in the comments section below. Now, of course, this video, the purpose of this video, is to offer an explanation regarding the mud found in the passenger footwell and on Tony Tucker's boots. And although this might seem a little bit unimportant as a topic, it certainly needs discussing, and that is the mud itself. Now, certain individuals, even on YouTube, have claimed that this Range Rover went to a beach, or maybe Costa del Rettendon, and that the mud seen on the side of the Range Rover isn't from the lane, but maybe from some other tropical location. Now, we know that the mud on the Range Rover came from the lane. Now, how do we know that? Because the mud on the sidewall of the tyres is the same as the mud on the side of the vehicle. If a Range Rover has driven down this track, the mud that you see on the tyres is from the lane, isn't it? Unless it's been winched up somehow. Well, hang on a minute, this is another thought, isn't it? Maybe it's been winched up somehow or levitated via some sort of UFO, and dropped in the very place that it was discovered. No, let's not get stupid. The mud on the Range Rover originates from the lane. Yes, it has this sort of light, sort of grainy appearance, and there's a very good reason for that. Now, the mud in this general area has a very high clay silt content. I know this because this is a picture of my car taken last year, some 2 miles away from the crime scene, and the mud seen on the sidewall of my own tyres bears a very similar resemblance to that seen on the Range Rover. When it dries, it takes on this very light, almost grainy appearance. So the mud seen inside the Range Rover in Tony Tucker's footwell and on the base of Tony Tucker's boots, realistically, it could have originated from anywhere. It could have been from the lane. Maybe he was forced outside the vehicle. Maybe he went for a piss. Maybe he went bird watching the night that he was killed. We've got no idea. But what stands out to me is this idea that Tucker and Tate went out on the 5th. They were in some sort of field. They got muddy. Now, in my opinion, that mud seen inside the Range Rover and on the bottom of Tony's boots may well have originated from the night before. And it opens up so many questions, doesn't it? Such as, was the plan to actually kill them on the 5th? Were they lured out on the 5th to be executed, but something went wrong? Maybe one of those individuals didn't turn up, or maybe, as I've said previously, this was simply a dry run. Let's see if we can get them out. Let's see who turns up. Let's see if they turn up armed. Let's see if they're overly suspicious if we lure them to a remote location. Now, what I feel we can say with a fair deal of certainty is that Tucker and Tate went out on the evening of December the 5th, resulting in them ending up in some kind of field. And I do wonder if they were taken to Workhouse Lane the night before the murders. However, what I think counts against that is the potential risk factor of being seen. Let's say, for instance, the perpetrators were spotted on the 5th lurking around Workhouse Lane, then that seems to me to be a bit of an unnecessary risk. However, if that was indeed Tucker, Tate and Rolfe seen in the Range Rover by White House Farm along with that mystery white vehicle on the morning of the 5th, then maybe that was them returning later again that evening. It's quite fascinating to think that when you look at this area, there are a multitude of different lanes, fields or remote areas where Tucker, Tate and Rolfe could have ended up the night before they were killed. Do let me know some of your own thoughts down in the comment section below. Now, if you found today's video to be helpful or informative, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button down below and subscribe to the channel for future content. As always, many thanks for joining me for this video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.